Thanks, Convener. I want to talk about the mitigation, the financial support that's available for businesses that are affected by the new restrictions that are on the way. With the change of the opening hours, particularly for hospitality, many of the businesses will feel that they've got no other choice but to close, but technically they will not be forced to close. Yet the grant support levels are either for those who are closing or hardship support for those who are affected by it. Now that is obviously already in places like Fife and Tayside that are in level 2, and many of those businesses are closing, but even though they're not required to. Now you could probably survive for 16 days without maybe some support, although it would be tough. But if this is going to be the ongoing structure of the financial support, I think there's a problem. And I just want to know whether the government's going to change the structure of the support to recognise businesses that are effectively got no choice but to close, even though they're legally not required to. Effectively, the grant support will be cut by a third, which is quite significant for businesses.
I think I have to say to Willie that were we entirely free to operate in the way that we would like to operate, with the resource that we need to operate, I would 100% agree with him. And I would want to make sure, because I'm a constituency MSP and he is a constituency MSP and he is receiving, I am sure, as I am receiving, very, very strong representation and entirely justified representation from people whose businesses are on the line. Good businesses that they have operated well and which they believe they can continue to operate well. But we are not in that position, and therefore what Fiona Hislop and Kate Forbes have to do is to try and find as much as they can to create the circumstances in which there is support for everybody who needs it. Hardship is clearly has to be one of the considerations in there because there have to be criteria. But I think I can do two things for Willie Rennie. One is to say that we will continue to try and do our utmost to support all of those who have been affected for no other reason except that there has regulatory change has taken place, important regulatory change, essential regulatory change, and they've had to not operate within it. And we will also continue to seek the resource that allows us to do so. Now, I think the points that were made yesterday in the debate were important in this regard. I think that listening to business and listening to the type of point that Willie Rennie has made about requirements and actual requirements on the ground is important, and we will do that too. I think also I should say that I would think Fiona Hislop would want to respond more fully to Willie Rennie in the light of his observations. But there is no resistance to providing support. There are those practical difficulties of the resource that we have, and we may not agree across the committee on this, the fact that we do not believe that that resource has been provided adequately or significantly in the way that we need.
I agree with Mike Russell about the overall level of support, and it's not sufficient, particularly for the larger businesses who have got greater costs, even though they're remaining closed. I suppose what I'm particularly pointing to is that even if South Lanarkshire, or only if South Lanarkshire and North Lanarkshire move into level 4, will the hospitality businesses get the full support that's available because they'll be required to close. So in some ways, the new structure eases up the finances on the government in that respect, in that narrow respect. And I just think it needs to have a re-look at all that. Now, I understand he's not the minister for this, but I'm not going to press him any further on the detail on that. And I will take it up with the Economy Secretary and the Finance Secretary to explore that further. But I think there is a significant issue here because this is a long-term setup, not just the 16 days, and because we've restructured it in terms of compulsion to close, then I think it does that. If I could move on to another area, I'm interested in how areas get down to level 0, because if you look at the Highlands and the Islands, their indicators on the documentation that was provided yesterday are all at 0. Yet the indication is that they'll only move to level 1. In fact, it's level 1+ with the indoor meeting in place. I don't know how they get down to level 0. What do they need to do? What are the indicators? Is there such a thing as -1 that takes them down to the zero level? How does that work? Because people want to have some kind of clarity and hope on this, and I'm hoping the Minister can maybe help.
It's a very good question. I think Jason Bleach should address it. It is dependent upon a variety of clinical and medical factors, as well as an assessment of the harms. And I mean, just before Jason does, one of the issues that emerged yesterday, as I'm sure Willie Rennie remembers, is this issue of judgment applying to advice. And this will be an area of judgment and advice, as all these will be. But I think Jason should address it.
We have to set the dial somewhere for each of the basket of measures that we put in, but they're not the only measures that the National IMT will have to consider, and they're not the only measures the local public health teams will advise upwards. So the system will be local public health teams into their directors of public health, into the National Incident Management Team, into the senior clinical advisors, me and others, and then into a four harms consideration. So 0, 0, 0, 0 in the grid doesn't necessarily give you a zero in your overall assessment of what that local authority should do. You have to consider how long the numbers have been reducing or at a low level, and then you have to feed in the other harms. And that will have to include tourism and transportation risk. It will have to include how well you can isolate out that particular piece of the country without travel, because you can't have people coming from a 4 to a 0, because you're just going to be back where you started very quickly. We know how quickly this virus is imported into countries or pieces of countries. So as we move forward and we get this first one over with, then there will be a weekly rhythm to this assessment, both from a public health perspective and from the Chief Economist and from the Chief Social Researcher, in order to advise Mr Russell and the Deputy First Minister and the CABSEC for Health on what they should then do around the decision making about each local authority. So you can get to zero, but the present position of the senior clinical advisors in Scotland is that no area in Scotland is ready to get to zero because of the state of the pandemic nationally, which we will have to consider, because we cannot isolate out pieces of the population enough for us to be comfortable that any part of the country should move to zero presently.